A couple things, and I do want to get into this idea that the children are safe when they're in your custody, because that's certainly not what we're hearing. But I want to ask you, do you want responsibility for these kids after they leave? Do you want to have the ability to do site visits and make sure that they attend the hearings and make sure that they're followed up on? Do you want that authority? We disagree that you don't have it, but I want to know, does HHS want that authority?
I couldn't speak for what HHS wants. I can say only that we will fully discharge requirements that we have. I will note.
That's not an answer. I mean, we've got a gap here. If this were a 4E investigation of a state foster care system, they'd fail. And you basically would withdraw federal money because there would be inadequate protections for kids. So now we have this group of children that for whatever reason, we can argue about pull factors or push factors, we can argue about that, but they're children and they're in our country. And the question is, what do we do with them when they're in our country? And I'm frustrated, and I think you hear the frustration here, because what we hear is, not, see no evil. We're not going to pay any attention to what happens with these kids afterwards, and if they don't show up, well, that's just the way it is. But I want to explore this idea that you just said, that when they're in your care, they're safe, that they're protected. I mean, you can't have not noticed all of the stories about sexual assault on children, about physical inattention, about injections of children without any permission. In fact, we have a professional who works at the Boston Medical Center. She's the director of child and adolescent psychiatry, said, if you're a predator, this is a gold mine. I mean, I'm concerned even beyond what happens with these kids when they're out of your custody, and we can't seem to agree on whether you have any responsibility for them. I'm concerned about what happens to them when they're in your custody. What are you doing to follow up on these dramatic and very disturbing reports that we're hearing about child sexual assault, about physical abuse, even something like, scrubbing a toilet with your bare hands? I mean, these are all legitimate reports that we're hearing over and over again. And for you, as an official of HHS, to come to this hearing and say, they're well treated, tells me that you're not taking this information seriously. 125 reports to law enforcement of child sexual assault in detention centers that are run by HHS, or at least contracted to run by HHS. Doesn't that concern you, Commander?
Ma'am, any allegation of abuse or harm to a child in care concerns me and everyone who works in HHS and in OR profoundly. It is not the case. It is not the case that we are not taking action.
You're saying none of this is true?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
Okay.
I'm saying that the statement that you just made, that we have done nothing about these, is untrue. So you've covered a lot of ground. Let me try and pick which one to talk about first. Would it be helpful if I talk first about what we do anytime there's an allegation of sexual assault?
What would be good is for you to backtrack on your original statement that kids in your custody are safe, that that there's no mismanagement within custody, within those facilities of what's happening with these kids. That would be the first thing, an acknowledgement that you do have a problem.
My statement that we remain committed to the safety of every child in our care and work to affect the safety of every child in our care is true.
That's not what you said, though. What you said is children in your custody are safe.
Our program exists to keep those children safe. And any child...
Well, you're failing. That program's failing by all accounts here. So let's move beyond that. And why don't you tell me what you do when, have you withdrawn any kind of contract to any of these facilities where these allegations have been levied? Have you done any kind of investigation? Are you currently reviewing whether you should move children who are in facilities where there's actually been criminal charges against employees of these facilities, criminal charges brought that they sexually assaulted numerous children in these facilities? Where are those investigations?
Yes, there are investigations made by ORR and by federal and state law enforcement and licensure authorities for every instance where there's an allegation of abuse against a
Has
child.
anyone lost their license, or have you removed children from any of these facilities?
I would have to get back to you on whether anyone has lost their license, because I had a state question. We have absolutely removed every child from a facility where there was a credible allegation of abuse while we conducted an investigation.
So how many
Every
children
single
have
child.
you removed from facilities at HHS because of allegations of sexual or physical abuse?
We'd have to get back to you on that.
Yeah,
At the-
please do.
When there was an allegation of abuse, one of the ones you alluded to of sexual abuse of minors at a facility, upon receiving that credible allegation, we moved every child out of the facility. So that does indeed happen.
Well, I mean, I can tell you, along with the rest of America, this sickens me. It sickens me that these children have been put in this, in this position and in harm's way, and that we, in the United States government, have responsibility for these children. Now, let's just move on, because I only have about 50 seconds left. We need an answer to the question of whether the federal government is going to take any responsibility beyond what you're doing right now to track and make sure that children are safe once they leave detention. And that's really why we're here. We cannot, get a sense of where are these kids, and we keep being told, well, they aren't missing. I think the chairman made an excellent point. There are lost kids. There are kids we don't know where they are. And we've got to have some level of responsibility beyond what we're seeing here. That's why we're here. We're not the enemy. We're just trying to figure out how this system can work better. And then all the advocates here, who are all children advocates, and I hope you are too, can then provide the resources, provide the legislation. I think the legislation's there, but certainly do something proactively to change this outcome, because we cannot let this continue. This is wrong, and most of America thinks it's wrong as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to just follow up with you, Commander. And I can appreciate, and I think we're all appreciative of your understanding as a social worker. I think that's your training of what happens with childhood trauma and what the long-term ramifications can be. And so I don't mean to be harsh. I think that all of us who have watched this are deeply concerned. And I want to get to this issue not just of what happens when they leave, but what's happening when they are in facilities. One facility provider, basically, if my rough math is right, 11,000 children have been assigned to Southwest Key over a number of facilities, not one facility, but they're obviously a large provider. The reports coming out of Dallas say that they've basically, in a half-year period, have a contract that's worth $500 million. That they're being paid, which, if you do the rough math, it's about $45,000 per child. I think that we should have some pretty high expectations at $45,000 per child. So I would love a list of all the contractors that you currently have, the number of complaints and the severity of the complaints in each one of those cases, what disciplinary action has been, and how you're cooperating consistently with state authorities, who usually are the licensing authorities, and I understand that. And so if you can, in fact, get us kind of where you're at right now with contractors and what additional needs you may see, so that we can have a better idea. I want to just comment briefly on Senator Johnson's comment. Senator Carper and I have been very engaged in trying to get asylum seekers to stay in place and seek asylum where they are. And I think that to simply say this is a horrible path forward and separating kids, that's the way we're going to provide deterrent. I think we have to look at all the reports of people saying that's no deterrent for us, because the conditions at home are just as horrific as the conditions of the journey. And so we've got to figure this piece out, and it's kind of beyond the scope of this hearing. But I do think that one of the key issues for me is my initial question, which is, does HHS want this responsibility? Because HHS, the way I look at the function that you perform, and basically, who reports to you I mean, every state division of children or human services, in our case, it's the Department of Human Services, which is responsible for child welfare in North Dakota. They have an ongoing relationship with HHS. And so it's not unusual for us to ask you to to perform the functions in a federal kind of umbrella that the states perform in their state 4E or foster care programs. And so, I think you guys have to do some soul searching. Are you willing to take that responsibility? And if you are willing to take that responsibility, let's just get beyond the do you have it right now, because I think there's a disagreement here. But if you are willing to take that responsibility, what do we need to provide? And that's what I think Senator Carper is getting at. How can we, in good faith and collectively, not, file reports back and forth for which we respond, but how can we put the kids first and decide what we're going to do to fix this problem? And so I would really encourage you to take back what we've said here, back to your supervisors and back to the chain of command and say, you may not have a choice. And, rather than resisting taking this responsibility, figure out how you're going to assume this responsibility and what you need to do it. Because I don't think there's any tolerance up here, certainly with us, for not knowing where these kids are. That's just a non-starter for me. I want to know where all these kids are. I want to know what their status is. I want to know, whether they've been placed in places that are safe. And we know a lot of these kids come up here as indentured servants. I mean, that they're required, that a lot of these kids are required to work to pay off whatever the transportation was if they truly were unaccompanied. I mean, we can't be ignoring the possibilities here. And so the possibility of abuse outside the system, but we have to rectify the abuse inside the system that we all agree you have a responsibility for. So I want to thank you for your acknowledgement of trauma, your care of children. I didn't mean to be too harsh, but it is imperative that we get our arms around this problem and move forward with solution-based evaluation and numbers. And so please get back to us and let us know what we can do to help you perform this function and be better foster parents. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.